When you work in investment banking, there's a running joke that the average person thinks that in your spare time, you're just partying it up with models and bottles, but instead of hanging out with Kendall Jenner and drinking champagne at a hot New York nightclub, what you're actually doing as a banker is spending a lot of time in Excel models and drinking a lot of water bottles to stay awake. In the vast hierarchy of investment banking, analysts and associates who are the most junior bankers are least likely to be partying it up with models and bottles. But Wall Street did recently increase their compensation in an effort to attract junior banker talent, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll first be starting off by describing how investment banking compensation works. I'll then go over investment banking analyst and associate compensation, and make sure to stick to the end of the video as I'll be sharing the most important thing that helped me land my job at JP Morgan. Before I get started though, quick shout out to Financial Edge for sponsoring this video and helping me be a full-time YouTuber so I can make videos like this for all of you. All right, with that said, let me first give you a brief overview of how investment banking compensation works. Really simply, there are two parts to an investment banker's total compensation, and that is their base salary and their bonus. And your bonus is affected by two things. The first is not really in a banker's control, and that is how the overall firm and group performs. And so if a group brings in a lot of deals in a given year, everyone gets paid more, especially senior bankers. The second is how you as an individual perform, and at the end of each year, you're given a final review and a ranking, which is a super intense process. At JP Morgan, there was a 5-tiered ranking system, with the lowest being N for needs improvement, then M stands for meets expectations, then E was at the very top for exceeds expectations. As you might imagine, there's a lot of buildup when it comes to bonus day because you just worked an entire year, put in a ton of hours in order to get your final ranking and bonus number. And it's kind of like if you're a student and you are waiting for your college decisions. That's pretty much what bonus day is like. One by one, you'll go into an office for a private conversation with your resource manager, and he'll give you some feedback from your teammates and your directors and VPs and everyone above you. And basically, during that whole time, you're just thinking in your head, okay, I don't really care. I just want to know what my number is. And then he gives you a number and your ranking. Then people leave the room either sad or unhappy usually. There are sometimes some people who are kind of okay and satisfied with their ranking, but bankers are pretty competitive people, and even though they can be genuinely nice people when you're working with them, and for the most part, I really liked a lot of my coworkers, but with that said, everyone wants that top rating, and so if you don't get that usually you end up being a little disappointed, and if you get that, you're just ecstatic. By the way, if there's anything else you'd like to know about investment banking, maybe recruiting, or what it's like behind the scenes, let me know down in the comments below. Okay, next up, let's go over old versus new analyst compensation. Going straight into the numbers, in the past, banks used to pay analysts base salaries of $85,000 in their first year, $90,000 in their second, and $95,000 in their third. Two things to quickly note before I move on. The first is that the salaries I just gave you are for bulge bracket banks, which are the largest banks in the world, probably ones you've heard of like JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs. I'm not really talking about elite boutique banks in this video. And the second thing I want to mention is that for a very long time, all these banks had the exact same salaries. Their bonuses kind of differed, but there was kind of this unspoken rule that no one would raise their salaries because then everyone would have to kind of just one-up each other, and that's kind of what happened. You see, what happened was a few banks first started to raise the base salary to $100,000, and then all the rest of them followed. That is except for Goldman Sachs, which is arguably the most prestigious bank in the world, and there was some grumblings from the inside that they may not follow the herd and raise salaries at all. But then just a few weeks later, Goldman announced that it was one-upping everyone and paying first-year analysts $110,000 and second-year analysts $125,000. So as you can see in this chart, pretty much every bulge bracket bank is paying $100,000 to first year analysts, $105,000 to second years, and $110,000 to third years. So while all the other bulge bracket banks are paying the same amount, Goldman is paying even more, and it seems like that was just a chess move that they were making where they were acting like they were not going to do anything, and then they just one-upped everyone. And so honestly, props to Goldman on that one. By the way, the reason Goldman only has 2 years here is because they either promote second-year analysts to associates or have them leave, while other bulge bracket banks have 3-year programs, but a lot of them usually also have fast-track programs where second-year analysts who perform really well are promoted directly to associates. Anyhow, next up, let's look at bonuses, and please keep in mind that these are estimates because no one yet knows if bonuses are going to go up or down with the salary bumps, but 70K was the highest for first year analysts at JP Morgan, and when I was there at least, and so that's the number I'll use for the max. So here I've broken down bonuses down into 3 sections, which are bad, average, and good, which, as I explained in the previous section of the video, depends on the firm and your performance. For first year analysts, we're looking at a range from 30K to 70K, for second years 45K to 85K, and third years 60K to 100K. Using the base salary that most of the bulge brackets are paying, basically minus Goldman, this gets us to an investment banking analyst total compensation range of 130K to 170K for first years, 150K to 190K for second years, and 170K to 210K for third years, which is a good amount to earn coming straight out of college. You may also notice that the differences between a bad and average bonus is smaller than between average and good, and that's because most banks pay their top performers a lot more to reward great performance. Okay, next up, let's go over old versus new associate compensation. By the way, I didn't really go into what an investment banking analyst does because I go through that a lot in this video right here. Associates also do a lot of the similar things, but instead of always building the entire Excel model or building a presentation, associates spend the vast majority of their time checking over an analyst's work. So for example, if I was an analyst and I built out a financial model with 10 different tabs and hundreds of rows, then the associate would basically have to check every single cell to make sure that everything was correct. And if I had built out a 30-page, 40-page, 50-page PowerPoint presentation, then the associate would have to make sure that all the data made sense and that the font was all correct and there were no spelling errors, basically to make sure that everything was ready to send to the client. In the past, associate salaries were 150K for first years, 175K for second years, and 200K for third years. According to several reports, banks have simply increased each year by 25K for the base salaries, and there's no news of any bulge bracket banks one-upping each other yet. So now the salaries are 175K for first years, 200K for second years, and 225K for third years. Next up, for bonuses, again, this involves a bit of guesswork, but they're all in the ballpark of what banks have given out in the past. For first years, the bonus comes out to 85K for the bottom performers to 130K for the best performers, 100K to 175K for second years, and 125K to 225K for third years. Putting all this together, we get to a total compensation range of 260K to 305K for first year associates, 300K to 375K for second year associates, and 350K to 450K for third year associates. One last thing to note here is that especially if the bank that you work at is public, a lot of your compensation actually comes in the form of stocks. All right, last up, let me share with you the most important thing for investment banking recruiting. For this, I'm actually going to split up my advice first for high school students / college students, and second if you're a few years out of college. Starting with the former, my number one tip is to join a business organization on campus that has a history of recruiting well for banking, or at the very least is business focused. Investment banking recruiting is tough, but it's also very systematic. And once you understand the rules of the game, it's very possible for you to get an offer, especially if you start early. Speaking from experience, I joined a business organization back when I was at UC Berkeley, and I cannot credit my friends enough for helping me throughout the banking recruiting process. I actually even started late. My senior year, I decided to switch to investment banking recruiting when in my first few years, focused on consulting recruiting, and my friends in that organization really taught me the ropes of what to study for. They mocked me for interviews, and I promise you, no matter how many YouTube videos you watch or whatever, it just helps so much to have a group of friends in an organization that you're part of, to have a bunch of resources, but also just to be there with you to let you know when info sessions are coming up or when you need to submit applications, or being able to reach out to older people who have gone through investment banking recruiting already. All of that is just so valuable and important, and I really highly encourage you to focus on that if you're still in college or a high school student. If you're lucky, you'll be joining a club or organization that has alumni at different banks who you can reach out to, and they can also help you out in the recruiting process. And this is kind of an unfair advantage, but it's also earned because other people could have joined these clubs or organizations, but they didn't, and maybe you did. I also recommend joining these organizations as early as you can because investment banking recruiting happens so quickly these days, either in your sophomore spring or junior fall. And so it really takes 1 to 2 years to be prepared for everything. And I got super lucky by just starting my senior year, but I would not recommend that to anyone. If you really want a good shot, I recommend starting even your freshman year. Next up is my advice for those who are out of college already, and this is really simple. Just go get your MBA. Roughly 80% of analysts leave after a few years, and so investment banks really focus on hiring associates out of MBA programs. I get asked by people who are a few years outside of college all the time, how do I break into investment banking? And there's pretty much no other advice I can give you. And yes, MBAs are super expensive, but hopefully you can see from the compensation that I just showed you, you can pay off your tuition debt in a few years. By the way, if you're interested in recruiting for investment banking, I just finished my resume and cover letter guide, which is filled with all of the best tips that I've compiled over my career, reviewing hundreds of resumes and cover letters, and also from leading JP Morgan UC Berkeley recruiting for 2 years. And so if you want to check that out, it's at www.rareliquidcareers.com. You can also see it in my description below. With that said, thank you so much as always for watching. Let me know down in the comments below if you'd like me to make videos about anything else. And thanks so much for tuning in. Hope to catch you in the next video. Thanks.